So far in Revelation, I kind of went over this last week. We've gone through chapter 1, where we saw Christ, the image of Him, and what He'll appear like when we see Him again. We saw chapters 2 and 3 that talk about the church age, the messages, Christ's messages to the 7 churches, and all that He expects of us, all the kind of things the problems that the churches have, and what we need to do to overcome those as we're anticipating His return. In chapter 4, we began to see all the things which are to come, and that's going to go, well, actually the main message would be from chapter 4 through chapter 16, but we'll see all the final things to come, all the things that are going to come in the eternal state off into chapter 2, and we'll see the millennial reign in there as well, and probably going from 20 into 21 and 22. And in chapter 4, we saw there the throne of God. In chapter 5, we saw the book with the 7 seals. We saw Jesus as the Lion of Judah, but we also see Him as the slain Lamb and the only one worthy of opening the seals. So last week we just kind of outlined this message, just like I'm doing now, from 4 to 16. And we looked briefly at chapter 6, where we saw the first 6 seals of the 7 are going to be opened here in chapter 6. We know there's 7 seals. 6 of them will be opened 6 of them will be opened in chapter 6. There'll be an interlude, and then off into chapter 7 and 8, we'll see the 7th seal open. Just an outline of 6 again. In verses 1 and 2, we'll see the first seal opened. And at that time, we'll see this rider on a white horse coming forth, and he is going to be given a crown and a bow with no arrow in it. He's coming in conquest. He's to represent conquest. And then in verses 3 and 4, we'll see the second seal opened, where you see a rider on a red horse show up there. And he's going to be representing war and slaughter and people fighting against one another. In verses 5 and 6, we'll see a rider on a black horse. And this is going to be plague, and it's going to bring famine and pestilence. In verses 7 and 8, there'll be a rider on a pale horse. And this one is going to represent death, and Hades is going to be following right along with him. Hades or hell, according to the King James Bible. When we get to the 5th seal, we're going to see the saints under the altar. And the Lord's going to comfort them, because they're going to be standing there saying, how long are we going to have to wait until you avenge our deaths? And the Lord's He's going to give them white robes, and He's going to tell them, you need to wait a while. Everybody that's going to be sacrificed here during the tribulation they haven't died yet. They haven't all been martyred yet. So you just need to wait a while until all that's happened. So we'll see that with that 5th seal. When we get to the 6th seal, we're going to see the day of God's wrath. It's going to be a big mess, and that'll be in verses 12 through 17. And last Sunday we read all 17 verses just to get that overview. But now, even though I covered the first 2 seals and the release of the first 2 horsemen on the white and red horses respectively last Sunday, I'm going to do what Jen Psaki did. I'm going to circle back this evening. I'm going to circle back, and I'm going to present a more accepted view of who these horsemen may be. I presented a view that I had learned in seminary, but there's very many, and I want to tell you right now, I brought these. One's called 4 Views of the End Time, and another one is Understanding the Book of Revelation. And I'll leave them here. If you want to look through those, you can see that there's many different views of what's going on here, depending on your theology, where you are, what you believe. Well, we believe in pre-tribulation, dispensationalism, and you'll see what that is in here. But I'm going to preach right down those lines tonight, according to what you're already familiar with. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not coming back and realigning my sermon or scripture here to get your approval. And I want to tell you that because that's what happens to churches that become heretical. The pastor gets up there, and if the congregation doesn't like it, but it's just because it doesn't sound like what they think it should, the pastor may go back in there and try to please the crowd. Well, we can't please the crowd. We got to try to get this right. We got to get it right together. So I'm not going to rely on the scripture to want approval, but I am acknowledging that other interpretations of prophetic symbolism and events are possible and need to be considered, especially by all of us, and especially in the book of Revelation, because it's a complex book in the Bible, and it's bringing everything else in the Bible together. It's the revelation of Christ himself, and it's a good idea to, when you go in to study it, to not go in there and let yourself become confused, but go in there and just realize there's many different ways to look at the book and try to figure it out. That's why you'll see some people that say, well, these seals, perhaps they were covering the period up to 70 A.D., and this is all these things happened prior to that. Some people think that these things keep repeating. All the way this happens, you have false leaders come up and they win people over, and then there's war and pestilence, and it happens over and over again through history. Same thing with the Antichrist. I think he appears in different forms, like perhaps he was Caesar during that early time, and then he's Hitler later, and it can just keep going on until the final one gets here. The Antichrist is taking different forms, but we don't need it. We're not going down all that way. Last week I told you that perhaps this first rider, this white horse, could be Christ entering to the world during his first advent, his gospel, and the way it would conquer. Well, I'm thankful that all of you are paying close attention and you're giving me good feedback. It's very important, and if I ever claim to be a final authority on God's Word and tell you all not to challenge my interpretations, I hope you'll fire me on the spot, because I need that. I need it all the time. But again, last Sunday I presented the first horseman on the white horse as possibly Christ coming. But again, after I spoke to most of you, you said, "Well, I don't know about that." I asked you, "Well, had you heard that interpretation before? What do you think of it?" And then I said, "Or did you hear the one is the one that you're used to, the one where the white horse is not Jesus, but it's the Antichrist?" And most of you said, "Yes, that's the one that we adhere to." So I went back to my Bible, I went to my commentaries, I dug out everything, and I found that there were at least 8 different solid views possible of who this man can be. But the one, again, that you're most familiar with and most accepting of is that this is the Antichrist. Well, let's go back into the first rider here and take a look at him again. Let's look at Revelation 6, verses 1 and 2. It says here, "And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, 'Come and see.' And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer." Come on. So we look at these verses 1 and 2, and we see this opening of the first seal, and we see that this man on this white horse is given a crown. John sees the Lamb opening this first seal there in verse 1. He says, "I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder." And he hears the beast say, "Come." And then he sees this white horse and the one who sat upon him, and it's called a he, so we know it's a male. We know it's a man on this horse. And who is this he that's spoken of in the passage? Well, the interpretation that you know declares that this is the Antichrist, and he comes forth on this white horse. And as the Antichrist, we know he's the false Messiah. He's trying to imitate everything that Jesus does. Now his horse is white, and we see the same symbolism used throughout the Bible here. And last week we were able to compare this with Revelation 19, verses 11 and 12. I'm going to read those again in a second, and you'll see why. But his horse is white, and if we look at him at the Antichrist, and we say, well, why is the Antichrist coming on a white horse? When we again read Revelation 19, verses 11 and 12 here, it says, Then this is Revelation 19, verse 11 and 12. This is actually Christ coming at the end of the tribulation period. And it says here, "And I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself." So to support the one riding on the white horse in chapter 6 is the Antichrist and not Jesus, you might come back to 2 Corinthians 11:4, where Paul says, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. The devil's able to make himself look like an angel of light, or even in Christ. And we know people are going to be fooled in the last day. The Bible tells us that. You know, Jesus says, look, you're going to be saying, "Oh, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Christ." And he said, don't believe it. Don't believe when people are claiming to be Christ. You'll know when it's me, when I'm coming. You won't have any doubts.
Amen.
And so here we see this man on the white horse. He's on, and it's supposed to be representing white. He's coming across as if he's righteous, and he has a bow. But again, the bow has no arrows. And Katie pointed this out last Sunday. And you know, in my mind, I thought, well, if you told me that you had a gun, you wouldn't have to tell me there were bullets in it. So I didn't think much when I saw that. When I thought, well, there's a bow, but there's no arrows. I didn't think of possible symbolism, but it can very well be. We've seen that even names, every little word that's used, everything makes a difference. And so it's very possible that he's coming with no arrows for a reason. Because when he comes initially, he's not coming armed. He wants to come as righteous and seeming harmless and friendly and trying to win you over. So this could indicate that he's going to conquer, but that he's not going to do it at first by overwhelming you with power or armies or anything like that. He's going to come, he's going to use charisma and ideology that you like, that agrees with your carnal self. That's the way he's going to conquer. He's also may have some political power to persuade the people of the world, again, that he's the Messiah, so that they'll follow him. Well, he has this crown that's given to him, but this crown in the Greek version of this, when you go back and translate it, it's not, it's called a Stephanos. We've talked about this before. It's like a laurel. It's the crown that you get when you win an Olympic game or something, and it really shows that you've had victory, but maybe in a minor competition. But it's not the crown of a sovereign. The crown of a sovereign would be a diademata, for a diadem, for a king. But this is not what this man is wearing. He's wearing a crown that's not for a king. It's just a victor's crown. So he's coming to conquer. That's his aim here. And it's not going to be the Lord. It's not going to be the Father God that's giving it to him. It's going to be the people of the world, if this is the Antichrist. And so he's going forth deceptively. He's going forth to deceive and conquer, coming forward as if he's the Messiah, as if he's the Christ, and coming to conquer. And but look at 2 Thessalonians. See what Paul says about this here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 8 through 12. 2 Thessalonians 2, 8 through 12. Paul says here, he writes, he says, "And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming." That's going to be the Antichrist, right? So that's who he's talking about here. But listen to the rest of it. He says, "Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness." So this is why it's going to be easy for him to win the people over. He's going to be telling them all the kind of things they want to hear. We're looking at that actually almost in this day, aren't we? Where you have carnal people that want to believe that evil's good and good's evil, and they're persecuting the church and flocking towards all the sinful stuff. But this false Messiah, Again, he's going to easily win over the hearts of the people who have not earnestly sought Jesus in spirit and truth. There's a lot of people, we're seeing it in this day, right? We're seeing it, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, but they're not seeking Him in spirit and truth. They want to claim to be a Christian. They want to have the facade of being a Christian and being a good person, but they're really all about themselves, and they're not seeking Him in spirit and truth. And as a result, they're going to be given over to reprobate minds come this time. And then, when that happens, when enough people are won over by this Antichrist, all these people that are given reprobate minds, then it's going to escalate to the next level. So now let's look at verses 3 and 4. Verses 3 and 4. This is the second horse again, but we're looking at him in a different light than we looked at this last Sunday. And it says, "And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, 'Come and see,' again. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword." So again, we see an opening of another seal, this time the second seal. And we see here that people are going to be killing each other all over the place. John sees the Lamb opening the second seal, and he hears the second beast again say, "Come." And John sees this red horse, and he who sat upon it, it's another man, isn't it? It's a he. But again, this he is still the Antichrist. He's just coming in a different capacity this time. He came fooling you, came and won you over with charisma. Now he's coming in a different way. He's changing your minds and hearts. He's making good evil and evil good, and he's making people hate each other. I'm seeing that already when I look out there. I see all kind of people with such a hateful spirit. We've been talking about it here a lot lately, and I know if I've been experiencing it, you've been seeing it too. So here he's coming in this capacity, but now he's given power to take peace from the earth. While most are thinking that he's come to bring peace to the earth again, he did that deceivingly. Just the opposite's about to take place, and we can kind of see this in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, where Paul writes there. He says, "For when they shall say peace and safety, then suddenly destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." And Ezekiel talks about this too in his prophecy that pertains to the end times in Ezekiel 38. I know we're familiar with that one too. In Ezekiel 38:21, Ezekiel writes this. He says, "And I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord God. Every man's sword shall be against his brother." Against his brother. So it won't be bad enough that we just everybody starts hating everybody. This is going to get kind of personal, isn't it? Last week I kept telling you about this book that Larry got me that kind of addresses some of this stuff, and I got some of the things I'm going to talk about now from ideas from him. I kept calling him Emerald. I don't know why I was calling him Emerald, because it's a mirror. Probably because I like Emerald's cooking show back when he hit it. So I know I shouldn't be watching those things, but he has some magnificent barbecuing going on. But let me get back to the meat here. Get back to what we're on. Get back on task. This Antichrist, when he comes again, is the red horseman. He's given a great sword, it says. And you're thinking, is that like Jesus? But at this point in time, it's not. What he's given is called Machira Megale, and you've heard the word mega before. It means big. That's where you see where it says great. That's megale. But the kind of sword this Machira, it's the Greek word not for a big kind of sword you'd be fighting with in battle, but it's a short sword or even a dagger. It's made for personal confrontations, like an up close and personal knife fight. But this thing's going to be this kind of sword. Even though it says great sword, this is going to be like a cheap Chinese toy compared to the sword that Jesus is going to wield. And we can see that because in verse 19:15, when Jesus comes back at the end of the tribulation, it says there, "And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, that with it he should smite the nations." Now that sword, when you look at the Greek there, the Greek used for that term sharp sword there is the term rhomphaia oixia, which is a whole different kind of sword altogether. This is a large, broad war sword, and the definition says that it cuts and pierces, and it says an imposing sword, synonymous with finality and dominance. So when it's talking about the sword of Jesus, it's a whole different ball game here. Very, very intimidating and dominating sword. So the sword of the Antichrist at this time, what it's saying that he's coming with is he comes as a second horseman, indicates that, again, these killings are going to be up close and personal, and not between combatants necessarily of different countries so much as between neighbors and even family members. We're all going to be turned one against the other. Everybody that's been given over to a reprobate mind is also going to have a wicked spirit. They're going to kill each other over any little thing. That's bad. When I watch the news, we're watching that happen too in a lot of different, especially in the major cities, aren't we? Every single day, killing. So people are going to hate each other so much, they're going to be killing each other again over any little thing. And this is going to bring us up to verses 5 and 6 here. In verses 5 and 6, it says, "And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, 'Come and see.' And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine.'" So here we're looking at this opening of this third seal. We see here that this is going to be, it's indicating famine. You're not going to have enough food to eat. He sees the Lamb opening the third seal, John does, and he hears the third beast say, "Come again." And he sees the black horse. Again, it's a man, and it's the Antichrist again, coming in a different capacity. It just keeps escalating, doesn't it? First he came and won us over with his charisma, and next he's turned us all into hateful souls with hateful spirits, everybody that's reprobate, and we're all killing each other. And of course, when you get like that, you can't work together on anything, can you? And everything, your economy, everything falls apart. And now you run into this black horse situation where there's just death everywhere you look, and you see this plague coming upon you. That's causing starvation. Well, these balances that he has in his hands now are very significant. Most of the time when we see balances, we think of justice, don't we? We think of Lady Justice standing there with a blindfold on, holding up the scales, and we think of justice. But that's not the case with these balances. These balances are false balances, or well, they're balances that indicate the dire situation of the time. So John's heard this voice in the midst of the four beasts, and what are they saying? They're saying a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, but hurt not the oil and wine. And you're thinking, what's that code for? What's he trying to say there? Well, because you don't think a penny is very much. Well, in this term it was. A penny at this time is an entire day's wages. So a measure of wheat here is about a quart jar. And so when we get to this point of this penny being a man's daily wage, is only going to buy 1 serving of food for 1 person. Think about that. Your entire day's wage to buy 1 meal for 1 person. It's not going to be enough, is it? And so it mentions the barley. Now, people ate barley. People still ate barley, but they preferred the wheat because the barley only had about 1/3 of the nutritional value that the wheat did. And so they would feed the barley to their animals. 3 measures, again, would be about 3 scant meals. Again, only 1/3 of the nutritional value of wheat. But then we come to the oil and the wine. And what the oil and the wine are symbolizing, this is the stuff that the fancy people eat, right? The expensive food in the restaurants, the food of the elite. And so the oil and the wine comment here tells us that the elite of the world, they're not going to be worried at all about everybody that's starving to death, that can't afford to eat. There's going to be people starving to death all around them, and they're not going to care. Their only concern is the oil and the wine that's fattening them up and that they're enjoying. We're even seeing that now, aren't we? We sure are, all around the world. So how many of you have heard the phrase, let them eat cake? I don't know if our kids know it. I don't know if they're even teaching about Marie Antoinette anymore, but if you remember, Marie Antoinette was France's final queen. And when the peasants were all starving to death, they didn't have any bread to eat, she replied, well, just let them eat cake. She was just so far out of touch with them. Well, that's how all these elite people are going to be after this seal here is open. So, and this quote reflects the Queen's blatant disregard for this dire condition of the poor people of France of her time. And so this was the main reason that she was deposed by revolutionaries, and they publicly beheaded her. She was guillotined in 1793. And you know what? The elite in verse 6 that are alluded to there, they're not going to be getting off easy either. They're not getting away with anything either. They just might as well enjoy their oil and wine, because they're going to get what's coming to them. Listen to what James says in James 5, verses 1 through 5. He says this, he says, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, and they crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth," and that means the Lord of hosts. "Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and have been wanton, and ye have nourished your hearts as in a day of slaughter." So while everybody else is dying of starvation, they're just pigging out and enjoying it. But James he's talking about these same people in this last days. He said, you're going to get what's coming to you. Enjoy it now, because everything that you saved up, you were just storing it away and hoarding it away from everybody else without any concern for them. It's going to come back to Saw. I was talking about even the gold and stuff that they would be wearing would corrupt. The corruption of it would burn their skin like fire. Well, this brings us to verses 7 and 8. We get to 7 and 8. And it says, "And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death." But this horseman doesn't exactly come alone, because it says, "And hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beast of the earth." Well, I want you to note here that when sword is mentioned this time, if you look back in the Greek, this time it is Rhomphaia. This time it is the big, broad, killing sword. So this time, this Antichrist is coming in a capacity to deal out death as in a great way. Not just in the little way where he's got everybody confronting each other and killing each other as with the smaller sword, with the little dagger type. So again, we see this horse is bringing death, and followed by hell. This is the opening of the fourth seal. John sees the Lamb again opening this fourth seal, and he hears the fourth beast say the same thing again. "Come and see, come look at this." And then John sees this pale horse, and he who sat upon him. And his name is Death, hell following him again, and he sees that the power is given unto them, both of them, over a fourth part of the world. You're talking about death coming over a fourth part of the world. Just this week, they said on the news that our population just went over 8 billion. They estimate that we just went over 8 billion people this very week. And so, going by that, 1/4 of the world's population today would be over 2 billion people. Can you imagine that? And this is just the seal judgments, because there's many, we have the other 2 types of judgments to follow. But this is just the first part, a fourth, 2 billion people. And these people are going to be killed with the broadsword, maybe through war, through hunger, or through famine, starving to death. You're going to come killing each other. Now I want to tell you where it talks about death here. Again, you wouldn't say that death kills death, and what they're doing, they're going to be overcome by plague. in this case. So you got sword, hunger, plague, and it even talks about them, that he's going to be given the power to kill with the beast of the earth. And you look at that and you say, well, I don't know, I can think about when the Caesar fed the Christians to the lions, but these aren't Christians. This is all the wicked people of the earth, right? And you're looking and you're saying, well, how's this going to happen? Well, when there's famine, everybody's starving, including your pets and your animals, and all the coyotes and other countries' tigers and jaguars, and you won't be able to leave the house, because when you leave the house to go out to try to scavenge for whatever you can find, grass, blades of grass or leaves, whatever you think you might be able to digest, the animals are going to be out there looking for something to eat too. And this could be a very real situation, and probably is in many third world countries right now whenever they get down this low in these kind of bad situations. But it's going to be this way around the entire world. It's hard to believe that this can happen. But when we think back, if you remember what you learned in history, when the Black Death came, that killed over 25 million people. If you're thinking, well, that's not all that much these days. Well, it was a lot then. It was a fourth of the entire world's population back in the 14th century. This Black Death killed a fourth of the world's population then. A similar disease could do the same thing in this day. The Spanish flu was the last big one we heard about before COVID, and that was just in March 1918, just a little over 100 years ago. In March 1918, in the last months, this was right after World War I, this deadly flu virus, it was identified at Camp Funston over at Fort Riley. And you're thinking, where's that? Well, it's just up in Kansas, one state up and one state over, right here next to us. And so 6 months later, after it's identified there, the flu had already gone all around the world. It became a worldwide pandemic and was seen on every continent. When the Spanish flu pandemic was over, about 1 billion people, which was about half the world's population, had contracted it, but many survived it. It's about, though, I think it's probably, was even worse. We always think of the Black Death being the worst thing, and it did kill so much of the population, then half of the world's population, but the flu was probably the most lethal pandemic so far in the history of humankind, because between 20 and 100 million people were killed. And that was even more than the number of the people that were killed in the war itself. That's a lot of people. A lot of people to die all in one short span of time. The nearest thing we know to this now is COVID. We just experienced that, and we see how it can happen, don't we? It's entirely possible. It's very easy for it to happen, and especially when man starts getting all wicked and starts monkeying around with things like we did with this, right? COVID was released upon the world by scientists who were working in the Chinese laboratory. And I'm saying that people they won't define what happened, but we know it, right? You've had too many different scientists come out and say there's no way that happened by evolution. It's engineered, and we can tell, and this is why. We know that mankind manufactured that, and whether they release it on accident or on purpose, they still got this horrible result. There were 634 million cases so far, with over 6.6 million deaths from COVID, which is about 12% of the world's population. Right now it seems to be at bay, but we know that this man-made virus continues to mutate. So far it's mutated and got a little weaker, but if it keeps mutating, you don't know what it's going to do, and it's entirely possible that this one thing that we've let out of Pandora's box here could possibly kill billions before it's over with if it keeps mutating. We don't know what it's going to do. But we can see here in the prophecy that things like that are going to happen. They're entirely possible. So with war and famine and plague, it's going to be no wonder that, again, the animals will be starving and hunting humans, and we're going to see all these terrible, horrible things happening, and it's going to be a miserable time to be on this earth, a miserable time to be in existence down here on earth for sure. Well, to this point, we've seen the opening of the first 4 of the 7 seals to be opened, and then the 4 riders on the 4 different colored horses that are going to be released when those seals are opened in the future. We're interpreting, as I'm coming back around, as I've circled back around, we're interpreting that these riders all represent the false Messiah, the Antichrist, and not Jesus himself. But I want to tell you this, why some people look at this and say, I don't know, this kind of sticks in my craw a little bit looking at it this way. It seems to make a lot of sense, maybe the most sense. But when I looked at it, I'm thinking, well, it's really interesting because the Antichrist is ultimately being used as the instrument of God's wrath upon rebellious mankind. Now, we know from biblical history that God does that. He uses your enemies to punish you. That's what he did with Israel, isn't it? Judah, when he poured out his wrath out upon them, he used their enemies to punish them, even though the enemies were evil and wicked. So it's probably no wonder. God's paradoxical anyway. He can do that. He's God. And so from that perspective, it could make plenty of sense. Well, next Sunday, we're going to talk about the martyrs under the altar, and I'll preach on the wrath of God to finish the chapter off the following Sunday after that. Unless we may have, we won't be able to, that'll be the fourth Sunday, won't it? Okay, so you'll get a little break on that before we get to finish the chapter. Well, we don't know when the first seals are going to be opened. Like I said, there's many different beliefs on how that's going to pan out, or when the seals are being opened. If they're opening now, if they're not going to open till in the future, we don't know. Like I said, I've got these booklets over here. If you want to page through them, you can see some different ideas that different theologians have from different perspectives. So we don't know when the first seals are being opened, but some believe that this could be during pre-tribulation times, just like right now, which could be any time now. And that they could begin. And everything we've talked about so far is just matching up so much with what's happening. It's just at a low extent, right? It's just at a low level right now compared to what we see here. But it's already happening. We're seeing these leaders coming with great charisma. We're seeing people with a hateful spirit turn against each other. And so we could be in the early stages of this even now. Don't know. And I'm not going to pretend to know. Especially when I'm looking at all these other different perspectives, and they're all saying, well, we don't know, this is what we think might be happening. So just consider that. But considering current world events, if there was ever a time to be urgently motivated to preach and to your loved ones, to reach out to them and preach to them and take them under your arm and try to bring them to the Lord, it's right now. It's always been right now, but I just have to say, I just think it's getting more urgent. All the time, every day that we live and breathe and we see things heading south here, I'm just more and more convinced we really need to be on the ball and be on the move and be doing what we're supposed to be doing and work until Jesus comes. So.